Welcome back to Media7. We've looked at the ethics of public relations, but how does it actually work? Simon Pound has a source.
Public relations, the art of spin, the dark side, journalism's evil twin, if you will. PR has an image of flashiness, free gifts, glamour, consumer toy largesse, and also as a manipulator of the pure news. But what is PR really?
At its best, PR is simply about effective communication and understanding your audience.
This is an idea that holds true over the many elements that make up PR, whether it is consumer PR,
which is a lot of writing nice blurbs about FMCGs, fast-moving consumer goods,
or corporate affairs PR.
That's those carefully chosen words that bank and utility spokespeople use, words tested and refined to be as reasonable and appealing as possible.
Political PR.
The spin and counter-spin that make our important issues out like some kind of sporting fixture.
Or media placement.
That's getting favourable corporate messages into the news. Connor has worked through a number of these. He was at industry leader Pete PR and was media liaison for David Shearer's successful by-election campaign.
So is PR necessarily a bad thing?
I don't think so. I think people's negative perception about PR comes mostly from when they see it employed to defend some dickhead celebrity who's made a mistake. But when you don't notice PR, that's when it's doing its job well. And an example I can see of the best kind of PR of the last wee while would have been the Ministry of Health's communication strategy around swine flu.
How receptive are the media to ideas that PR take them?
I think it depends on how you catch them. On a good day, you can get anything past them. On a bad day, like a Michael Jackson death day, it's really hard to get anything past them at all. Unfortunately, for democratic understandings of media, the newsrooms in our country and around the world are shrinking. And so media are relying a lot more on communications professionals to provide them with story ideas, to provide them with information about a story or an event or a consumer issue or whatever. And they don't have time to do the research and background themselves.
So that's the inside word. Or is he just spinning the PR line? One thing is for sure, for an industry that's all about image management, PR sure does have a poor reputation.
Simon Pound with that report. Well, Simon Lambourne, Connor Roberts, who is in there, is someone who clearly has moved from one flavour of PR, consumer PR, to another one, and he's working in the political realm. Is that unusual? Are the skill sets the same?
I don't think so. A lot of journalists move, for example, from their chosen profession to public relations, and really it shouldn't surprise us. It's extending their skill base. Some of them move back, some of them like it so much they stay. But I think we're not actually talking about two professions that are that different. It's communication, it's about clarity, it's about getting information across. It shouldn't be any surprise that we're so closely aligned.
Which vein of PR do journalists tend to head for? Is it crisis management? Is it political PR? I presume they don't go into consumer PR.
I'm thinking of a TVNZ journalist from several years ago who is now an internal comms public relations practitioner. I actually prefer the term public affairs. I think it's more encompassing than PR, which seems to be somewhat narrowing. But you've got people that go into investor relations, you've got marketing communications, you've got government relations, you've got stakeholder engagement, internal comms.
Stakeholder engagement just makes my head hurt. Jock, do you think you're in the same business as Simon?
Absolutely not, and it's interesting to hear him using this language. I mean, I know many cases, and I won't embarrass my dear friends by naming them here tonight, you know, where PR people have taken business journalists out for a few beers and a glass of wine and a fat steak, and they've gone back and they've written all sorts of glorious stuff about how wonderful some new investment project is. And it doesn't necessarily have to be blue chip, but, you know, that's what they do. I mean, you cannot say that public relations is in any way related to journalism. Not if journalism is going to do its job. Sadly, what Simon is saying is unfortunately correct to a certain extent, because journalists are by tradition lazy bastards, and they will take any old rubbish that's given to them as long as they can rehash the intro and put their name on it. And I mean, I see the PR stuff that comes out from government departments and all sorts of people every day, just like everyone else does. And I pick up my morning paper. There's no evenings left now that I'm aware of. Pick up the morning paper, and there's the very same story, appearing as if it was written by a staff reporter, when it's not. It's lies, it deceives the public, and I quite frankly think it's wrong.
Helen, I read an academic paper, I believe by one of your colleagues, which made the case that communication students now, some of them can't tell the difference between publicity and a news story, which sounds terrible, but is it true in some cases?
It is. It's one of the things that in the last couple of years we have endeavoured to overcome, because, yes, young people, I think this comes out of media studies in school, when you put a press release in front of them and perhaps even bury a good story in sort of the 6th or 7th paragraph, it takes them a while to learn that actually this is the point of view of a business or a company or an organisation, and that it's not, they don't have to retell that story in the way that it has been given to them, or even to retell that story at all. Is
that something a lesson they might have learned better if they were trained on the job the way journalists used to be?
I think so. I think, I don't know. I remember when I first started training back in the dark ages, we had a Wednesday morning press release day where we would look through the press releases on a Wednesday morning and discard most of them. But in the beginning, I remember going to my chief reporter and saying, well, you know, what do you think of this? I still think they'd have to go through the same learning curve. It's just in a different environment, and they might be able to do it more quickly because, of course, you're immersed in it. Whereas in university, you're doing lots of other courses as well. But I think that learning the difference between PR and news is something we might think it's obvious. It's actually not obvious to young people now, especially I think because of the amount of advertising and consumer marketing that comes at them all the time.
Karen, you were a journalist before you went into political public relations, and quite a good one, I gather. Why did you make that shift?
Oh, I was interested in political journalism, and Geoffrey Palmer offered me a job, and I thought it was a fantastic opportunity to see the inside of government. And it wasn't a shift that I saw myself doing. I saw myself as being a journalist for life, but it didn't work out that way.
Was the money better?
Yes, it was. Yeah, but I wasn't motivated by money. I was motivated by the experience, and it was a very tough experience, I have to say. Well,
what did you make of Jerry Brownlee's campaign last year about the alarming number of, as he put it, spin doctors in the government sector? The 500 spin doctors in government. I get the impression that those people might have wished they were spin doctors because that might have been a bit more glamorous.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. I mean, one of the things about PR is, and Simon's touched on it, is that there are many facets to it these days, and it covers the sphere from internal communications, which, you know, writing the staff newsletter and working out strategies for that, to writing websites and coming to grips with how you use new technologies to communicate with the people you want to get to. And a lot of it these days doesn't have to involve the media, and more I think that is the case. And so, you know, within the government sector, it's wrong to point at a figure, you know, and call those spin doctors, because there's a lot more to it than that, and many of them are doing, you know, very worthy jobs that involve a great deal of hard graft, which
I think that's a really important point that's just been made. Look, we're all taxpayers. We want to see efficient use of our taxpayer money. We also want government to be transparent and accountable. If we go to a government website, we want to be able to download that information quickly. Now, the information just doesn't end up there. You know, people have to put it up there. For journalists to be able to hold government departments to account, you know, there's got to be someone at the other end of the line answering the phone, processing all their media inquiries, so that story and the information gets out there. You know, communications people in the public service, you know, are there to help in a way. It's not the opposite.
Can I make a further point? I think that one of the things that Jock is pointing actually is more accurately a failure on the part of the media these days. And the media is going through very tough times and doesn't really offer a great career track for many journalists, you have to say now. And, you know, people criticise press releases, but I know I've made calls to journalists with, you know, very modest little story ideas about terribly worthy events and said, you know, you might be interested in covering this, and they'd say, can you write something down and send it to me? I mean, these days, because of the pressure that they're put under, they're asking for it on paper. They're asking for the PR person virtually to do the work for them.
Well, I'll say, can you email me the details? I would never say write my story.
Yeah, but leaving aside the small cases that Karen's talking about, let's talk about the major ones. Is that when you want something of some significance from a government department or people who really matter, you find increasingly obstructions, hurdles, put in your way. The press officer, the public relations person wants to, what's your angle? What is your game? What are you at? Where are you coming from? I mean, Jerry Brownlee picked up actually in a story that I wrote last year where we exposed the huge cost of the increase in PR people within the government. In 1 year alone, it rose from $30.5 million to nearly $40 million.
But as Simon points out, some of these people are just putting content on websites.
I'm sure they are, but I would have thought that one of their functions as, say, a communications person was to actually communicate. And if a journalist was to wanted to speak to a minister or someone with some serious questions, that they would actually, as they say, facilitate your access to the minister. Very, very hard if they don't want to answer that question.
This is an interesting point. I think the one that stands out is the way Niwa handled Jim Salinger.
Yeah.
Surely it would have been better to just let the guy keep talking to journalists. Yes. He hadn't put his foot in it, you know, over years. Was that a case, Karen, where strategy gets in the way of actual communication?
I think it must be a case where there was no strategy. And looking at that as an outsider, I think it's really smelly, and I'm surprised that more hasn't come out about that, and I wonder why, because if I was in a PR role within that organisation, I would be saying to the senior management team, listen, you've got a guy here, Jim Salinger, who's highly respected. The media are always going to go to him. They're always going to want to talk to him. You're stupid to try and do something else. You're going to look really, really silly, and it's just not going to work at all. And that's proven to be a total disaster for them.
I have to say, Russell, as an employee of an advocate organisation, the Automobile Association, I'm regularly speaking with the communications people from the transport agencies. Now, I don't think we should tar them with all the same brush. I deal with some very competent, some very professional and efficient people, and they deserve our praise for making...
You're not asking them hard questions, though, are you?
You may be surprised that sometimes I am, yeah.
On the other hand, Helen. All right. On the other hand, we had a situation here where we wanted, a couple of weeks ago, we wanted someone from Telecom to talk about the business on a panel, and because their strategy was designed around having separate spokespeople for separate parts of their business, they couldn't send someone to our panel. Surely that's when strategy overwhelms good sense, isn't it?
Doesn't make sense.
You find this in a lot of organisations, that they have specialist spokespeople for small questions, and a lot of media questions are actually broader. And that, again, the PR person would argue that they can bring all those people together and they can get the information for the journalist. But the journalist would be saying, well, actually, in the old days, there would be somebody I could go to and they could answer. Even if they weren't an expert in an area, they knew enough to answer the news questions. And we've got to remember as well that now in New Zealand, there are just over 2,000 journalists and there are 5,000 PR people. Now, this kind of puts into sharp relief the questions of, oh, the journalists are failing and the PR people are succeeding. Well, if it was the other way round, we would have a much healthier
We have
media.
to wind up here, but I think there's an amen from me and Jock on just put me in touch with the person who can talk to me. That concludes this discussion. So thank you, Simon Lambourne, Karen Beanland, Helen Sissons and Jock Anderson. Now, you may recognise this picture, one of the great war photographs from the Spanish Civil War by the greatest war photographer, Robert Capa. Except, according to new research, it was probably staged. In this week's Take Two, Sarah Daniel lays out the rich tapestry of visual fakery in the media.
The spectacular art of deception. Remember this?
It turns out the grand fireworks during the Olympic opening ceremonies weren't as grand after all.
Some were pre-recorded and some were CGI. And still in China.
It turns out the Chinese girl who sang Ode to the Motherland during the opening ceremonies was lip-syncing.
True or false, the media screws with perception, and we lap it up. Pictures that lie. It's been going on since the 1800s. Stalin famously took his enemies out of photographs. Today, technology presents even greater temptations to the media. The final moments on board the Air France plane before it crashed into the Atlantic? No, the opening scenes from the TV show Lost. Carnage in the Gaza Strip 2008? Actually, France 2 network used 2005 footage and later apologised. Thousands were taken in by doctored footage of the 2004 tsunami. Pictures can be slim on the facts, like Kate Winslet for GQ magazine. That's not me, this is. CBS newscaster Katie Couric before she was photoshopped, and after. Time magazine made OJ darker. Why? To make him look more sinister, perhaps? Sometimes in the media, as in life, things are really as they seem. This is Good Night from me, Sarah Daniel, for Media7.